All right, welcome everyone to the panel here on volunteering and your resume. I know a very exciting topic here at Summer Games Done Quick, but an important one. My name is selcouthmind, or Sel for short. That's what I'm known around as here in the speedrunning space. And to start, there's a couple of things I'd like you to join me with. Is first to engage. I'm going to have some light activities, some questions for you throughout. I encourage you to engage with them. We're going to go super low tech. I originally had some big fancy things planned, and then I got here and went, the Wi-Fi in this room kind of sucks. So we're going to go super old school. I'm going to ask questions. I'm just going to get you to raise your hand, things like that, okay? There will be question time at the end, so if you have questions, feel free to take note of them and come ask. I might not have an answer, but I can hopefully at least give you some recommendation. Are we ready? Yes, there's a standing mic. So if you have a question, please go to the standing mic to ask it so that they can hear it in the recording as well. I'm going to also ask that you have some way to take some notes available. Open up your phone, have the Notes app handy. Some of these activities, some of the questions I'm going to ask you will be better for you if you write some things down. Right? I want you to have some things to take away from this presentation. So, who am I? Why am I here doing this panel? Well, first and foremost, my day job is in vocational services, which is a really fancy way of saying I help people find jobs. More specifically, vocational services specifically is working with people with some sort of barrier to employment. So think people with disabilities, immigrants, newcomers, things like that. But broadly, I work in career and employment services. So this is where my qualifications to talk about this comes from. And so I quite literally teach workshops on writing resumes and cover letters and all these things. I also am a marathon organizer. I'm the head organizer of an event called Preventathon. And so I have hired, over the years, 25 plus different people for staff. I've also helped recruit and screen hundreds of volunteers at this point. So I have seen all sorts of things related to not necessarily true resumes, but just applications for these things in volunteering. And as well, I also put my volunteer experience on my own resumes. And I have actually gotten interviews because of the experience I've placed on there. So I'm a big believer in it because it has worked for me, and I think it can also work for all of you. So here is an example from my own resume. That's a snippet about hosting. So I predominantly do hosting. I also do a lot of donations, processing. I've done a few other things as well, but I predominantly host. And so this is a real live example from one of my own resumes of what experience can look like. And we'll talk about some of the details of why it's structured in this way, because you might look at that and go, that feels like a weird way to describe a GDQ host. It's kind of a little weird. It's a little corporate in some ways, but that means I've tailored it to match the industries I was looking for. So we'll talk about more about that as we go. So a couple of quick little disclaimers for you. I am from Canada. I'm employed in the Canadian industry, which means my knowledge comes from a Canadian background. There's a lot of similarities between Canada and the US in regards to career and employment. I did some research, but there are some subtle differences. So I'm going to encourage you to take this as some tips and a starting point, and then go home and research what makes sense for your local community, what best practices are, and also what works for your industry. Your industry, what field you work in, might have specific requirements for talking about volunteering. You should go and look that up. I likely will not know those strict requirements. And this presentation is also focused specifically on speedrunning volunteering, but these tips are also applicable for other types of volunteering. So maybe you volunteer day-to-day back at home. You can take some of these tips and apply that to that as well. So what we're going to go over, we're going to start with why should you include volunteering. We're going to talk a bit about transferring skills, translating your experience between contexts, and then we're going to end with some best practices. So I have a question for you all. Have you ever included volunteer experience on your resume? Raise your hand. Okay, that's more of you here than I expected. Very cool, that makes me excited. Now, another question, do you think volunteer experience should be included on your resume? Show of hands. Okay, about the same. Very good. So, why should you include it? Well, there's a few different reasons. The first one is it strengthens your skills, right? It shows more skills that you have, more experience you've done, because volunteer experience is still valid experience. Just because you weren't paid doesn't mean that you didn't gain those skills, that you don't have that knowledge, all of that. And it can be very valuable for individuals with maybe less work experience. Maybe you are maybe a bit younger. I know there's people in this space who are still university students. Often you don't have as much work experience, so volunteering can really supplement that experience. Or maybe you're transitioning careers. This can also happen a lot. And so with volunteering, it can be a good way to showcase some of those more like soft skills or transferable skills that we'll talk about later, that you have them, and then it's still relevant for this new industry you're moving into. It also shows community connection, right? Volunteering shows that you care about community, care about others. It's a good way to show causes that you're passionate about as well. So, for example, we're raising money at SGDQ for Doctors Without Borders. Right? It's an indication that we care about global health, we care about the welfare of other people broadly. If you do AGDQ, we really volunteer there. It's where your passion is, right? That's Prevent Cancer Foundation. We're focused on helping prevent and treat cancer. The causes that you're involved with can really show a little bit about who you are. And one thing I will always tell people, people get scared about AI a lot right now. If people wanted to hire an AI, they would. They're looking to hire a person, which means this also includes what makes you unique. And some of that comes from what you're passionate about. What causes are you engaged with? So don't be afraid to include that, right? Your personality matters. So we're going to go over some real-life examples from some wonderful folks at the Volunteer Fam Discord. They very kindly gave me some real-life examples from their resumes. So we're going to start this one here from Gad. So it says, volunteer for Games Done Quick, a biannual gaming event that raises funds for Prevent Cancer Foundation and Doctors Without Borders. Past roles have included donation screening, chat moderation, and social media posting. Very nice, straightforward. We have another example here. This is from OG Happy Dude. So we see this is for donation and head donation. They give some information about location. We have dates there. Assisted with clearing donations for language and insider meetings for both on-site for archives, along with reading on air via host. Helped raise over $18 million for various charities. That's a pretty cool number. We have Turtle Run here, who's given me a very large section of volunteering experience. And so this is another way you can put it down. If you've worked with a lot of different events, you can see here that Turtle has broken it up by Games Done Quick stuff is at the top. And then we have some stuff with Midwest Speed Fest. Then we have Preventathon. We've got mutual aid marathons, and then just kind of miscellaneous, some extra things. And so it's really nice and quick to see sort of where do things fall. And it can be really effective depending on how you're applying for things. I wouldn't recommend the average person for most resumes necessarily to go into this much detail, but it can be great depending on what you're looking to do. We have one here from Chilling Willow, who has done a lot of leadership and like organizer level roles. And so as you can see, theirs is structured a little bit differently in that they're talking a little bit more about things they've done like as an organizer, because there's some differences between an organizer and a volunteer, right? There's some differences in responsibilities. One thing I love about what Willow has done here is they have noted the charity that the events raise for alongside. So they don't go into detail about what they do, but it's a really nice quick way for if someone's curious, they might go, okay, well, what's PRISM? Look it up. Okay, that's what that cause is. And we see lots of nice little details there. A little bit more expansive, but once again, in Willow's case here, they're also talking about organizer experience, so they've kind of blended it. Now, if you were thinking you're a runner, and you go, well, running is not volunteering. Hey, running is in fact volunteering. It's just a different kind of volunteering. We in this space don't think of it that way, but it actually is. And so David very kindly sent me an example of a runner situation. I see David's in the audience. And so this is done here as just like an interesting little fun fact. But you know, I've been on the main stage 9 times for the Awesome and Summer Games Done Quick marathon events. These events raise millions of dollars for charity for Médecins Sans Frontières and the Prevent Cancer Foundation. That's a really cool little fun fact, just tucked away at the end of a resume that shows something that David cares about and enjoys doing. And, you know, in an interview, if I was interviewing, I'd be kind of curious to know a little bit more about that. So it doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be complicated. This gives you a sense of some ways that you could structure it. Now, let's talk a little bit about LinkedIn. Who here has a LinkedIn profile? Okay, sort of, somewhat, most of you. I'm actually quite impressed, which makes some sense. My understanding is in the US, LinkedIn is a lot more powerful than it is in Canada, depending on your industry. If you do not have a LinkedIn profile, consider looking into it. It can be useful. But of note, LinkedIn has a volunteering section. You might need to go and click the add section button to add volunteering there. But you can then go in and put information. And the value of this is like your digital resume in a way. You can give your profile link to a potential employer and they can see your experience and your background. And even cooler with volunteering is some speedrunning organizations have a LinkedIn page. So as you can see, this is from my own LinkedIn where I have GDQ hosting on there. And so you can see that I have actually identified that it is with the organization Games Done Quick. They have a LinkedIn page. You can attach to that, which means if someone's looking at it, they don't know what Games Done Quick is, they can click on it and they can go directly to Games Done Quick's page. And so you can see how I've described hosting there. That's how I've chosen to do it. With LinkedIn, we typically want to avoid bullet points and we want to put more like a prose paragraph. That's best practices typically, but ways to do it. And then the wonderful Empireship gave me an example for head donations on LinkedIn. And once again, you can see, noting a little bit about what the job does, about the charities that they work with, and how frequently they occur. So, a really nice, powerful thing to add without needing to take a ton of time. So, let's talk about transferable skills. Is this a term that's familiar to people? Somewhat? Okay. So, these are skills that can be used in pretty much any job or role. They have previously been known as soft skills. Maybe that's a term more familiar to especially some of the slightly older individuals here. We tend to call them transferable now because we're recognizing that they're very valuable. They actually are, at least in Canada, employers are actually looking more and more for transferable skills than they are technical skills because it's those skills that's harder for things like AI to take over. So how do we identify a transferable skill? Well, the easiest thing to do is to look for the core function behind a volunteer role. So I'm just going to throw out an example. Hosts. What do you think is one of the core functions behind a host? Just yell at an answer. Communication. Yeah, exactly. So the transferable skill that most hosts will just have is just communication. That's what they're really doing. So I gave some examples here, and I will note my experience here has been like donations and hosting. If you have done one of these roles and I have this wrong, please correct me, because I've not done every role, so I've done my best with the knowledge I have. But hosting, communication, teamwork, check-in, you're doing customer service essentially. Same with talent experience, that's a very customer service adjacent role. Stream tech, there's a lot of attention to detail in that. Same with things like audio tech, right? You're having to pay careful attention to things. You're making sure that with stream tech, things are cropped correctly. With audio, that things are balanced correctly. Details are very important. Head donations, something that they're responsible for is they're providing leadership or mentorship to the donations volunteers underneath them. And runners, they're doing a lot of multitasking. There's a lot of things that you're thinking about. It's also very teamwork heavy, right? As the runner, you're working with your comms, you're working with your host, all these things to be part of a larger production. So I'm gonna teach you a little bit here about a program from the Canadian government because I think it is very cool. I know we're in the US, but I promise you, stick with me on this. This is really, really cool. So the government of Canada has a program that they call Skills for Success. And in it, they have highlighted 9 key skills for the very current age. They created this, I believe, in about 2022, so it's quite recent. It's very much post-COVID, very aware of a lot of the technological advances. These are 9 key skills they've identified as being very important for just job seekers and as well for employers to be considering. So we have communication, which is consistently being ranked, including in the US, as #1 skill that employers are looking for. Creativity and innovation, problem solving, which has always been very large but is increasingly becoming more important. Reading skills, are you able to read things well and clearly? Digital literacy, so this includes being aware of tools of all sorts, including things like AI, but just broad digital literacy. We live in a very digital age. Collaboration is also very important. Adaptability, writing, again, that's kind of connected to communication, but not just verbal communication, but can you also write clearly? And then numeracy, which is just skills with numbers. Do you have basic math skills? Are you able to work with numbers at least a basic level? So these are 9 basic skills that as you're thinking about your volunteer experience, consider which of these 9 skills do you have in your volunteering experience? Which of these have you used? And can you start to include these? Because these are some great, just basic skills that are transferable and applicable to pretty much any role. So we're going to do a little bit of a question, a little bit of activity. I'm going to give you a minute here to think. So I want you to think about what volunteer role or roles that you've done at GDQ or at other speedrunning events if you haven't volunteered at GDQ before. And I want you to think for a minute about what core skills you used in that role. So I'm going to give you all a couple minutes to just think about that. This is where I encourage you to take a note. And I'll have you all maybe shout out some answers after you've thought about it for a minute. All right. Does anyone want to share a core skill that they have developed through a volunteering role? You can just yell it out and I'll repeat it back. Task delegation. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so doing social media and adapting to the moment. Yeah, adaptability is a great one. Problem solving, critical thinking for donation comments, donation processing. Yep, absolutely.
Communication for audio tech, figuring out what the runners need to hear when everyone else is hearing what.
Yeah, so audio tech, communication, helping figure out what the runners, what everyone needs to hear in their ears. Yeah, absolutely, communication for sure. Chat mod and host judge, lots of attention to detail, being organized, coordinating stuff. Yeah.
Problem solving for all tech roles, especially like restream.
Yep, for all tech roles, problem solving, absolutely. Yep, very important.
Presentation and planning as a runner.
Presentation and planning, yeah, as a runner, for sure. Yeah, you're having to plan what you're going to do and think about how you're presenting. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. So, was that hard? I'm seeing a mix. Some people found it easy. Some people found it a little challenging. It's a good thing to practice and think about, not just with volunteering, but just anything you've done, right? Thinking about what are the skills that you've gained in anything that you've done is just really useful. So let's talk a little bit about translating context. And before we get into slides, I want to tell you a really brief story. So when I first started the event that I run, I reached out to the charity, and I'd worked with them a little bit as an individual streamer, but now I wanted to run a speedrun marathon for them. And I, immediately just went, they'll know what speedrunning is, right? No, they did not. And so I had to go back and explain to them some things of like, okay, what's a speedrun marathon? What are we doing? Like, we're playing video games quickly, and we're going to raise money for you in the process. That can be kind of confusing to people if they've never heard it before. So it's very important that we avoid jargon, which is essentially the technical language of speedrunning. Because unless you are in this industry, in this world, you probably won't know what everything means. You might be able to guess, but you won't always know what it means. So, as an example here, employers may not understand what a speedrun marathon is, but most of them would understand what a charity fundraiser event is. That's ultimately what it is. We are a charity fundraiser event that happens to be done in the form of a speedrun marathon. So sometimes we want to just zoom out and go a little bit more to what's the broader, more umbrella term for what we're doing. Just avoiding jargon, right? Translating things more into more normal language. And then we also ideally want to use the terminology of your industry, right? So I come from a very much a nonprofits and now a little bit of more of a corporate world, but also current employment services has a very specific language to it in a lot of ways. Your industry likely has specific terminology that it likes to use. So once you understand the underlying principle behind your experience, once you know those core skills from your experience, then you can figure out what your industry calls those skills and then explain your experience using those terms. Right? This is also really important if you're trying to transition industries and you want to use your volunteering experience to help support that. Translate your volunteering experience into the language of the industry that you're moving into. And the easiest way to do that is just to understand what's the core skill underneath it, what are maybe like those skills for success, what's the transferable pieces, because that is, again, what will move between industry to industry. So I'm going to give you a really subtle example here, but this is a description of a host volunteer. So I'm going to read through it. I want you to see if you can spot like moments of like where this might be jargon, where someone who's not in the speedrunning world may not understand what it means. So the host volunteer helps keep the marathon on schedule by serving as a guide between runs and a welcoming presence for both the live audience and viewers. Hosts introduce runners and games, provide important event updates, recognize sponsors and community initiatives, and help ensure smooth transitions throughout the marathon. Working closely with the production team, tech crew, and donations processors, hosts communicate schedule changes, fill brief downtime with engaging content, and adapt quickly when runs go off estimate or unexpected issues occur. The goal is to keep the broadcast moving with minimal time loss while maintaining an energetic, inclusive atmosphere. That is a way to describe hosts, but it's very speedrun focused, right? If I didn't know what a run was, what do you mean? They're introducing runners? Are they people who are going to go run a race? Why are we talking about games at the same time? What do you mean by like downtime? That's very much actually, that's a broadcast type terminology. What's downtime? What's runs going off estimate? What does that mean? Right? There's a reasonable structure here, but there's some things that are very specific. So, I see there's a question. We'll come to you in a sec. Here's a rewrite of that, which translates it a little bit more to more general language. So the host volunteer acts as a welcoming presence and guide for both the live audience and viewers by introducing performances, providing important updates, and ensuring smooth transitions throughout the event. They work closely with the production and tech teams and are responsible for communicating event updates, engaging viewers, and adapting quickly to event and production needs. So, yes, I did take some things out of the second one, but this is a lot more understandable, likely to the average person. And so that's an important thing to think about as well. Sometimes we get so focused on the fine little details of our role because we know our role. But do we actually need every single one of those little details? Right? For example, hosts work very closely with donations processors. As a host, I love my donations people. They're fantastic. They keep the event running in so many ways. But depending on what I'm applying to, I maybe don't need to talk about donations processors. I can speak broadly of production and tech teams and sort of just encompass that within all of that. That's like an example of just a detail that is important in this context but may not be important in others. There was a question.
Actually, if it's okay, sorry. I thought of a helpful jargon there. Basically, anybody outside this role with
Yeah, no, for sure. So a comment was made here about the word like speedrun marathon. People think you're talking about like a running marathon, like you're running the 26 miles or whatever it is. So again, this is where we want to talk more about like I tend to say instead of speedrun marathon, I tend to put video game charity fundraising marathon or fundraising event. It's a lot more words, but most people can piece together what a video game charity fundraiser event is. They may not know what a speedrun marathon is. And I have, in fact, back in my previous days where I put speedrun marathon on a resume, I had someone think I ran like Ironman marathons, and I went, nope, not at all, not what I do. So translating it, even if it can be hard, even if it's like, but this is the terms I know, translating it to more general language means people can understand you better. And that's ultimately the goal of a resume, is for a potential employer to understand your skills, your experience, what you bring to the table, rather than exactly in fine detail what you exactly did in the language of where you did it. So, something for us to think about is what are some common pieces of jargon in speedrunning? And then how can we rephrase them? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes again to think about this, and then we'll do the same thing as we did with that last question. So let's think about some jargon and then how we could rephrase some of that jargon. All right, what's some jargon that we thought of? Yeah, speedrunning itself is technically jargon. So how could we rephrase speedrunning?
I tend to refer to it as skill exhibition. I tend to use the same language like charity felt. I know that's a bit wordy itself, but usually people at least get the idea that, oh, people are going up on stage and showing their thing.
Yeah, so something like, exhibition of video gaming, charity fundraising context. Yeah, it's a lot more words, but it's clearer to the average person. Any other examples? Does anyone think of any other jargon?
Replace chat with something like viewers.
Ah, yes, chat. I will say in the corporate world, if you were to say chat, most people, they're going to think you're talking about ChatGPT. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about viewers or audience members. That's another way. But yeah, very, very thing that we don't think about. But yes, don't just talk about chat. Talk about viewers. Any other examples we thought of? Yeah, so strats or manips, right? So talking about like strategy and planning things and routing. Manip, so like that's, adapting to or adapting things, modifying things. Yeah, very good, yeah. Any other terms, yeah?
I think of my runs as performances.
Talking about runs as performances, right? You've seen this in a few examples of mine already. I talk about performers rather than runners. Yeah. Very good. So, essentially, in all of these examples, we've taken it from being specific terminology to more general, like event and performance type language in a lot of ways. This is just more generally understandable. It would be great if everyone understood what speedrunning was and all of the terminology, but that's not reality. So translating it can make a big difference. Very good. I'm impressed with all of you. That was very good. So let's talk about some best practices. So with your volunteering experience, for most people, you should be using it to strengthen your resume rather than just relying upon it. If you are someone who just has volunteering experience, that is okay. It is valid experience. It is 100% valid experience. My own resume currently is about 75% volunteering. So it's very valid experience. You can absolutely land jobs with it. But if you do have work experience, you should use it to be supplementing that. Because again, you're using it to point to, again, more skills that you have, especially in those transferable realms. Where should you list it? There can be a lot of debate on this, and some of this is industry specific, some of this is region specific. If the skills are important to your application, so let's say you are maybe trying to transition industries and you've got it, you've volunteered at 3 GDQs in this role and it has this particular transferable skill that's highly relevant, include it under work experience. Treat it like it's actual work experience and, give the bullet points, describe the information, describe what you did like you would actual work experience. If you're using it more just sort of as a supplement or more of hey, here's some other things I like to do to show a little bit more of more community mindedness, for example, or being, more of a mission driven individual, that's some language you might see. You could make a volunteer experience section. You wouldn't want to necessarily go into detail about what you've done then, so you might not put bullet points, but you could just put very briefly what you've done. There's different ways to do. It's going to depend on what you're looking for and what your industry needs. So do your own research, figure things out. I personally, almost always, at least on resumes, put it under just work experience. But I also come from a background of I'm organizing events and all these things, so some of my skill sets are a little bit more complex than just volunteering, twice a year at GDQ, for example. But try different things, figure out what's going to work best for you. And then the final big thing that I want to talk about, and I'm deeply passionate about this, is quantifying your experience. When I say quantify your experience, does anyone have any idea what that means? Okay, there's a few of you. Okay, a little bit unsure. So essentially, quantifying your experience, it means you're adding numbers. So you're adding numbers and details to your experience that makes it feel a bit stronger to read, and it also makes it more concrete. So for example, I'm not going to go all the way back, but if you remember my example of my own hosting on my resume, you'll see I talk about, for audiences of up to 60,000 viewers. That's an example of quantifying. And then I also state that number is incorrect. Events I've hosted at have now raised over $11.5 million Canadian. That's another example of quantifying. Other people have had examples in there as well. If you are in a very, say, talent experience, you could talk about the number of runners that you have assisted at an event, things like that. And this gives a sense of just making it more concrete, right? I, as a host, could say, I've hosted at these events and all of that. Well, am I talking to 2 people? How many people am I hosting to? How many people am I trying to address? 60,000 is a lot of people. It also gives an indication that I'm pretty confident. You can kind of put me in front of however many people, and I'm probably not going to freeze. Right? That's an example. I also really love putting the amount that you've helped raise. I'm a big believer in that, because that can be a really nice brief talking point in an interview. It also shows a degree of dedication, right? If you keep going back to it and you've helped raise hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe not hundreds, but if you help raise millions of dollars, right, you're clearly pretty dedicated to this. And that's something that a lot of employers are looking for, right? Again, they want people who are dedicated and who are going to help them. So a good way to think about quantifying numbers to your experience is to think about how many of something, how much of something, or how often you did something. Those are 3 things that I use at work to talk about quantifying. There's other ways you can do it, but essentially just add numbers, add explanations, because again, something I see when I look at resumes at work for people is they often forget that the person who's reading your resume was not there, right? So I'm here with you all now, and so if I were to see your resume, I could probably understand some things broadly. But let's assume I'm not here, and I see your resume. I don't know how much of something. I don't know the scale of things. By putting in this quantifying information, it helps someone understand the scale of things, how much of something. And oftentimes, I've had interviews where people are very surprised to see that these events are actually this big, right? Right? They might be thinking like, oh, maybe it's like a handful of people. Thinking back like to the first GDQ where it was in Mike Uyama's basement, right? And there was like maybe 20 people, and they raised a few $1,000s. That's still great. That's still valuable. But the scale matters, right? So again, giving them the details to help them really understand what you've done and what the scale of your experience is. So if you're going to take one thing away from this, broadly, please quantify your experience. So we're going to do a little summary here, and then we'll get into some questions. So in summary, volunteering strengthens your experience and skills, both in the actual doing of it, and then by putting on your resume, you're really supplementing your experience. You want to make sure you're highlighting transferable skills. That's the key thing for the most part. Most of us are not gaining technical skills that we go back to work with. Like, I don't do donations processing in my real day job, but there's skills from that are relevant to my day job. We want to avoid speedrunning jargon, right? We want to translate your experience into your industry's language as well. And then quantify your experience, right? Help people understand exactly what you did, what the scale of it is. And so I do also want to note, I had a nice, lovely chat with Speff, who's our volunteer coordinator here at GDQ. And GDQ volunteers and talent, so I believe that includes runners and commentators, they can get a letter affirming their participation, so basically just confirming that you were in fact here and you in fact had this role, by emailing volunteering@gamesdonequick.com. So if you're a volunteer and you're looking just for like a confirmation, they will happily give that to you. Speff will work with you to get you the details you need on that letter as well. So please make use of that. The volunteer coordinators and the leads here are wonderful. So please make use of it because it's supporting information for you. All right, with that, are there questions? If you have questions at this point, I'm going to ask you to please come up to this mic just so people can hear you clearly.
All right, so I have a couple that are related, so please bear with me. Is this picking me up okay? Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so first off, a lot of jobs these days seem incredibly picky, so they basically only seem to be interested in you if you've already been doing their job for a competitor. So what makes me, give me a moment, rephrasing. What I'm curious about is how you can get that across to people to get their interest, even if you don't have, 10 years of experience at their exact job description. I'll let you answer before I ask the related one.
Yeah, that's very true. That is an unfortunate reality of the job market in a lot of ways right now. A few things I'll add to that. One is we realistically only need to match about 70% of the job description, right? If it's a required thing, we're going to need to obviously have that. But a lot of times, a job description is a wish list, right? They're looking for a unicorn. Very often, this person doesn't exist. So aiming for about 70% of a job description, if you match about 70%, that's worth applying to. Another thing as well, most modern job applications are going through things known as ATS, applicant tracking systems, which, especially at bigger companies, are very AI-based now, and there's a whole things about AI bias and preferences, and that's a very long conversation. I mean, we won't get on that tangent today. But with that, highlighting your transferable skills, but also matching keywords, right? So it's not just writing one resume and sending it a million places. It's looking at the job description and pulling those keywords in and matching things. And while that will not necessarily guarantee that you will get considered, it increases your chances of moving beyond being screened by these tools to an actual human looking at your resume. A lot of it comes down to structure as well. Most recruiters on that first initial human screen are only going to spend 6 to 10 seconds looking at your resume. So a lot of it also comes down to formatting. Is it quick and easy to scan? Is the important information all nice and available right at the top? that's a lot of the factors. There's a lot of things. That's very complicated, but some of the best things you can do in regards to using your volunteering is you're really using it to help supplement, especially a lot of those transferable skills they're looking for, right? And you can use it as years of experience, right? If they want 10 years of experience doing something, and you've maybe only done 5 of it in a paid setting, but you've volunteered for 3 more years using that skill, okay, congratulations, you have 8 years of experience. Right? It's a lot closer to 10. So it's going to depend on a lot of factors. Sometimes they'll have it set up where, no, you must have 10 years of exact experience and they won't accept anything else. You can't really work your way around that. You just kind of have to deal with that. But you can use this to supplement, tie in those transferable skills, connect it to the job description, and that will at least increase your chances in the current environment.
All right. And the related question was, with how hard it is to get hired to do anything these days with the current market, what advice do you have for people whose resumes would be mostly or even entirely volunteer stuff like this?
Treat it as if it's work experience.
Okay.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
no, quite literally. As I said, my own resume that got me hired at the job I'm currently working was like 75% volunteering. And most of it was speedrunning related. So, treat it like it's work experience, quantify your information, tailor it towards towards the job description, all of those things. Yeah. All right, we have another individual.
Check. Hello. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, so this is, I guess this was partially answered by the first question, but I'm sure most everyone here has like a hobby that they've spent years also honing. So like in my case, I'm an independent musician and music producer, stuff like that. So like, even though it's not volunteering and it's stuff that's done on your own time, is there ever like a use case where you would format in that, like using these kinds of tactics where you can kind of generalize experience to kind of end up being like, hey, look, there's this other thing that I know how to do that is, while maybe not professional experience, but is still like valuable experience in a certain case?
Yeah, it's still experience,
Gotcha.
right?
Okay.
You're still doing things. You're still gaining those skills.
Yeah.
It is a little bit trickier, right? If it's just like a hobby, a thing you do alone. It's a little, for example, with music, it's a little easier if you can talk about, like either like you've helped produce things for people, you've maybe, or like you've produced, I don't know, you've produced 5 songs, let's say, just as a number out there, right? You can talk about that a little bit more because there's a clear like product result at the end of it, or you've done X number of performances, and so you've got those skills from those performances. But it's still experience, even if you can't talk about it in detail. You can still include it, give it a couple of bullet points, try and quantify it, tie it into the job description. Those are things you can do with it. It's absolutely valid.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi. So, am I picking up? Okay. So, I wanted to ask about advice for doing this for sort of entry-level positions. Like, I don't know, I don't have like a degree, and so a lot of the places I'm applying to are like a grocery store or something. And is volunteer experience still relevant there? Is there anything I should maybe do different or stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to think for just a second on how I can best recommend on that. I can't necessarily speak directly to like your situation, but I can give you some broad like advice for this. So volunteering is still experience. It's still relevant, right? So the industry you're applying to doesn't change. It doesn't change that. The challenging thing with entry-level roles is entry-level roles are so weird right now, right? Where they might say it's entry-level, except they want 3 to 5 years of experience.
Yeah.
That's kind of weird. So if you need the volunteering experience to help like get you to a requirement in terms of like they want this much experience in something, absolutely include it if you have it. If you don't have it from a work context, but treat it as experience, right?
Okay.
It's more experience that you have in your pocket to use.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you for putting this on. So I'm kind of opposite. I've been in my industry for about 15 years now, and I don't plan on changing it. I think volunteering experience for me would kind of be there to supplement, kind of show who I am as a person, apart from all my list of different job roles and things like that I have. I guess my question is, is there a point in which that experience, the volunteering experience, may be a little bit too much? Or how long is a resume before it's like, hey, you should cut back on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will admit my own personal bias. I believe volunteering experience is just valuable always. But some general recommendations is resumes should not go over 2 pages, and that is consistent in the US as well. So resume shouldn't be more than 2 pages. So if you need to cut the volunteer experience to stay under that, absolutely. We also want to focus, for the most part, on experience that's within the past 10 years. So if you've got, volunteering experiences, say, 15 years ago, unless you're still in that role, maybe we don't continue to include it. But just focusing on what's more current and more recent, generally. Yeah. You're welcome. Are there any other questions? I will also say, if you think of questions after the fact, you are welcome to send me an email, theselcouthmind@gmail.com. Happy to reach out to you there. Or you can message me on Blue Sky. You can find me there. I'm happy to chat about these things. Turns out I didn't expect I would ever go into career advising. Turns out I quite like it. So if you have questions, please do reach out. Would happy to, at the very least, maybe point you towards resources if I don't have an answer for you. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. I'll stick around here for a bit if you have questions. But yeah, thank you for coming.